Why the Galactic Empire was destined to fall. The unshakable throne. The Galactic Empire had stood for 10 millennia, an unbroken chain of emperors ruling over 1,000,000 worlds. Its fleets darkened the stars, its legions crushed all resistance, and its laws dictated the lives of trillions. From the core systems to the rim, the Empire's reach was absolute, yet, in the depths of the Imperial Citadel on Celestis Prime, Chancellor Varkos knew the truth. The Empire was rotting. He stood before the grand holographic map of the Empire, the familiar glow of star lanes and system markers painting his face in flickering light. Every major trade route, every military station, every provincial capital, he had seen them all at their peak. But now, cracks had begun to show. Piracy was rampant along the outer colonies, planetary governors hoarded resources for themselves, and the imperial fleets were stretched thin from constant rebellions. The emperor refused to see it. The High Lords, wrapped in their decadent lives, dismissed every warning. But Varkos was no fool. He saw the pattern. This was not a mere moment of instability. This was the beginning of the end. The hidden rot. The Empire's strength had always been its discipline, its ability to enforce order through fear and control. But its strength had also become its weakness. The ruling class had grown complacent. Generations of noble families hoarded power, turning governance into a game of influence rather than leadership. Corruption spread like a plague, with governors buying their positions rather than earning them. Imperial policies, once designed to unite the galaxy, now crushed entire populations beneath unbearable taxes and military conscription. And then there was the Senate, a relic of the Empire's earliest days. It was meant to be the voice of the people, but it had long since become a theater of puppets, where senators bartered favors and betrayed worlds for personal gain. The common people, once loyal subjects, now seethed with resentment. Smuggling rings and resistance groups flourished in the shadows. On distant worlds, the name of the Empire no longer commanded reverence, but hatred. The spark revolutions rarely begin with grand declarations. They begin in the whispers of the oppressed, in the actions of those with nothing left to lose. It started on Carvos 3, a mining colony where workers were forced to extract imperial fuel under grueling conditions. When a transport ship arrived to collect resources, the miners refused to load the cargo. Imperial soldiers, expecting obedience, opened fire. They did not expect the miners to fight back. Word spread like wildfire. Other colonies followed suit. Local garrisons, underfunded and neglected, crumbled under the growing tide of resistance. Soon, entire star systems declared independence, raising banners of rebellion against the Empire. The fall of the Titan. As the Empire scrambled to respond, it found itself paralyzed by its own bureaucracy. The fleets were slow to mobilize, the governors too consumed with their own survival. Even within the imperial court, whispers of defection grew. The deathblow came from within. A faction of high-ranking officers, disillusioned with the Empire's decay, turned against it. They sabotaged war fleets, assassinated key officials, and opened hyperlanes to the rebels. The Emperor, once believed to be immortal in power, was abandoned. When the rebels finally reached Celestis Prime, the Imperial Palace stood silent. The Emperor had fled, his throne emptied. A new dawn. The Empire collapsed not in a single battle, but in a series of cascading failures. A system too vast, too corrupt, too rigid to adapt. What came after was uncertain. Some worlds rejoiced in their freedom, others descended into chaos. Warlords carved out their own dominions, and new governments rose and fell. The dream of unity, once upheld by the Empire's iron grip, now lay shattered across the galaxy. Yet, for all its cruelty, the Empire had given the galaxy structure. And in its absence, the question remained, what would rise in its place? This is just one take on the story. Would you like a specific perspective, more character focus, or a different structure? Why the Galactic Empire was destined to fall. Prologue. The Eternal Throne. The Galactic Empire had lasted for over 10,000 years. It had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, its banner flying above trillions of worlds. It had outlived its rivals, crushed rebellions, and rewritten history so many times that no one remembered a time before its rule. And yet, even the mightiest empire's fall of the last emperor, Lucius Sarkin III, stood on the balcony of the Imperial Palace on Terra, overlooking the vast cityscape of the capital world. Storms gathered on the horizon, black clouds rolling in like the specter of death itself. The Imperial fleet still held the high ground in orbit, its titanic warships casting long shadows over the planet below. The legions still marched through the streets, their polished armor glinting in the dimming sunlight, but he knew the Empire was dying, and nothing could stop it. The rot within the first cracks in the Empire's foundation had formed long before anyone noticed. Bureaucracy had strangled efficiency. Corruption had turned noble governors into tyrants. The once disciplined military had become bloated and complacent, its officers more concerned with political games than warfare. The Senate, once the voice of the people, had become nothing more than a puppet show, with the emperor pulling the strings. The nobility feasted while entire planets starved. The core worlds thrived, basking in the wealth of the empire, while the outer territories were left to fend for themselves, growing restless with each passing year. Rebellions were crushed. Dissidents were silenced. But with every act of suppression, the fire of resistance burned hotter. They had not learned the lesson of history. No empire could rule by fear forever. The collapse of faith. The imperial cult, which had once united the empire under a single belief, had fractured. The priests who once preached the emperor's divine right now whispered of omens and prophecy, of the empire's doom written in the stars. Religious sects broke away, declaring their own divine leaders. Some claimed the empire had lost its way, that the gods had abandoned it. Others declared the emperor a false god, unworthy of worship. Wars broke out, not just on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of the people. When faith collapses, so too does loyalty, and without loyalty, the empire was nothing. The economic ruin. The lifeblood of the empire, trade, industry, and taxation, had become an unsustainable beast. The core worlds demanded more, draining the outer territories of their resources. Entire sectors were stripped bare, their wealth funneled to Terra while their people lived in squalor. Piracy exploded. Smugglers thrived in the dark corners of space, making fortunes off black market deals. The empire had always tolerated some level of crime. Corruption was just another tool of control, but now, it was beyond their grasp. When the treasury ran dry, the emperor raised taxes. The people, already crushed under imperial rule, could take no more, and so the first true revolts began. The generals' betrayal. Once, the legions were the pride of the empire. Now, they were its greatest threat. Ambitious warlords, former generals who had grown weary of serving a dying throne, began carving out their own territories. Some declared themselves the true heirs of the empire. Others abandoned it altogether, forging new alliances with former enemies. The imperial fleet fractured. Admirals took their ships and disappeared into the void, unwilling to die for a lost cause. The Senate tried to maintain order, but they had no power. The emperor called for unity, but his voice fell on deaf ears. The empire was no longer an empire. It was 1,000 warring states, each fighting for control of the corpse. The fall of Terra. The final blow came swiftly. A coalition of rebel forces, rogue legions, and disillusioned planetary governors launched the final assault on Terra. The imperial fleet, once the greatest force in the galaxy, turned on itself, its commanders choosing their own survival over loyalty. The capital burned. The imperial palace, a symbol of 10,000 years of rule, was reduced to rubble, and on the steps of the ruined Senate, Emperor Lucius Sarkhan III was dragged before the people. Once, his name had commanded obedience across the stars. Now, it was nothing more than a curse. There was no trial. No ceremony, only the blade, and with it, the Galactic Empire came to an end. The epilogue. The ashes of empire history does not mourn empires. It buries them. The empire was destined to fall, not because of a single event, but because it had long ceased to serve its people. It had become a machine that devoured its own, a beast too large to sustain itself. But from the ashes, something new would rise, perhaps another empire, perhaps something greater. Only time would tell.